Hello and welcome to Take Your Time, a Persona 5 Strikers in not real-time podcast, but where we take our time playing Persona 5 Strikers as we go through the wonderful sequel to Persona 5 that we are playing. Me for the first time, Tom, my co-host, for the second time, I think. Is that fair to say? Well, hello, Tom Marks. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. I've made it through the gauntlet of this first jail. And have a lot of thoughts about it that we'll get into. And I'm excited to hear what everyone else thought out there. Before we begin, of course, thank you to everyone for tuning in. Just as a reminder in these early episodes, if you haven't played Persona 5 Royal or Persona 5, we highly recommend you go do that first before jumping into Strikers. And of course, listen to our first season of Take Your Time alongside it. But other than that, thank you to everyone who's jumping in. I'll say as well at the top of the show, if you want to write in with thoughts, especially after this first jail, you can write into dornology@gmail.com, or you can find us both on Twitter. I'm at JMDornbush. Tom is at Tom R. Marks. Or of course, you can leave a comment on the YouTube version of the show at youtube.com/Dornology as well. But other than that, we're going to be getting through the first jail, not palace. It's going to be very hard to not call them palaces, but the first jail of Persona 5 Strikers. We're going to be talking about it, about combat, about the story of it, about all the sort of nooks and crannies of this first exploration of a different metaverse. But before we get there, we do have some housekeeping, of course. And Tom, that involves an answer to your pop quiz question.
Yes, and thank you for everyone who wrote in. There were too many people to shout out. Apparently, this was an easy one to ease people back in, which I'm glad about. That was a slight part of the goal. But thank you to everyone who commented on the YouTube channel to say the answer. Obviously, we love hearing people get these right because it means you're paying attention. So the quiz last week was, as a reminder, that the first time they go into the metaverse, the whole gang goes into the metaverse, they meet Sophia, and An wants to do something to Sophia's outfit. And I said, what is that something? And for bonus points, why does Sophia say no? Jonathan, did you have a guess? You seemed like you didn't know this one last week.
I didn't, and then I saw some of the comments, and as soon as people said it, I was like, oh, right, of course, that. Yeah.
So An loves her outfit and asks if she can floof it. She wants to floof the outfit as if, like floofing?
Sure.
When something is floofy and you floof it.
I mean, it sounds like you're talking about a Pokemon evolution line at that point, but yeah.
That goes in line with what Sophia's answer of no is, which is her exact words. Let me get it, because it's very good.
I can
Her exact words are, she is neither a child nor a pet. And so she says, no, you may not floof me.
That's fair. That is a fair response. Though you would floof a Pokemon. So, yeah, I guess that's...
Exactly.
Yeah, you're correct. Which is, part child, part pet, I guess, is what you think of when you think of Pokemon. Anyway, well, thank you to everyone.
Accurate.
Everyone who got that correct. As Tom said, there were a ton of people who got that correct on the YouTube comments. So thank you to everyone who wrote in and guessed correctly for that. As we said, you can write in there. Twitter, email, like Devin did. Devin, I was going to say Tom, if you didn't know this, Devin wrote in with a PSA for people who are playing on PlayStation 5, if you happen to be, because of course, Persona 5 Strikers is backward compatible. There's not a native PS5 version. But Devin said that as a result of how much faster the PS5 CPU is than the slower CPU of the PS4 Pro, apparently both frame rate and resolution mode locks to 60 frames per second automatically. So there's no reason to choose performance over resolution if you're playing on PS5.
Oh.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently I haven't tested it out, so if Devin's wrong, you can all yell at him, not at me. I'm just the messenger. But no, Devin, thank you for that information. That's good to know for anyone out there playing on PS5. Of course, as we mentioned, this game is on PlayStation, Switch, and PC, so people across the metaverse of consoles, not the metaverse that we don't want to talk about, are playing it. So hopefully you're enjoying it wherever you are playing it. I'm playing, Tom, I don't know about you, I'm playing on PlayStation 5. I actually didn't ask this. Are you also?
I am as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Good to know.
It's just what I played on the first time, and it's, easy for me.
That makes sense. Well, in that case, obviously, if anyone has any specifics to let us know about the PC or Switch versions, definitely write in as well. But with that said, I think it's time to discuss the jail. We're going to kind of be going through essentially July 27th through July 31st.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like before we were going through hard dates. This time it's the second half of July 27th and the first bit of July 31st, right?
Yeah, exactly. I guess to not spoil it, though it's going to be what we talk about at the end of the episode, we're basically going up to the point where you get a vehicle. And then once
Yeah.
you've gotten the vehicle, and
That is not a cat.
yes, that isn't a cat. Which, you know, when you think about it, it's like, why couldn't Morgana just be the vehicle this whole time? But
Or a motorcycle. Or a skateboard.
it would be cool if they all were on one skateboard for the entire game. We will get into rideable skateboards in just a bit, because that is a cool extreme sports element to Persona 5 Strikers. But no, we're going to go through all of it, and as you said, it's not exact dates, but we're going to take our time going through this. And that is, of course, we left off pretty much at the infiltration mark. It was sort of the time to jump in, and like we've said, Persona 5 Strikers kind of just gets right to it. It's very like, and you'll see that a few times here. There were a few moments that I was like, oh right, they don't like wait a week to go do something. They're like, we should do something. All right, we're going to do it, and they just go.
Yeah. It's very quick, and this is a great example also because you can come and go as anytime you want, and you're gonna do however much of the jail it lets you do in one calendar day, right? It's a different vibe because last season on Persona 5 Royal, what we were doing was like, oh, well, I did this today, and then I went out and I hung out with someone the next day, and then the next day we sent the calling card, and then and it kind of interwove, like, all these different elements of the game. This is like, we're just going to talk about the jail first until it gets back to story stuff, because there's just a lot of jail to go through, and that's what you're doing.
Yeah, and one thing that so I as I said at the first episode, I've experienced this jail before. Everything going forward will be totally new to me. I don't know anything else past that, but so I did have a little bit of an expectation coming into this. And just like general top level thoughts before we get into anything specific, Tom, I'm curious what you think of just like, this is an introduction to Striker's kind of setup of everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good first level, for sure. I think it definitely sets the stage about, again, not to get ahead of myself in terms of what I already know, but, like, it does set the stage in terms of how different it is from something like the, palace structure is different with the jails, where, like, the palaces were all essentially, and there are some little, exceptions here and there, pretty dang linear, right?
Yeah.
Like where they were just sort of straight lines that you walked down in terms of actual structure. The jails have you going around different places, revisiting places, going backwards and forwards a lot, right? Like you go to the castle and you see the searchlights and then you leave, and then you go to this other place and then there's a prison keep in the way and you're like, oh, we got to find a different way, and then you go back to the sewers and then the sewers bring you back to that area. Like, so there's a lot of sort of going back across areas you've already been, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just a very different structure, right?
Yeah.
That it's a lot more, the map is a lot more open to you, and you can sort of just run around it a little bit more freely. And then there are still these linear sections here and there that you have to, go through this area or that area to do. It's not like it's non-linear. It's just much more open.
And in terms of that openness, I think it's also something of like, the spaces themselves are open. Obviously, there were big places in 5 and Royal, but it was very much about going like room to room, whereas this is, street corners or large parts of a sewer system or large chunks of like a neighborhood versus.
And it's I think partly is because, those areas, the map itself doubles as your battleground, right?
Yes,
so they
exactly.
need these big open spaces, whereas in Royal, every time you got into a fight, you just went into whatever area they wanted you to go in, and it didn't really matter if you were on, a bridge or whatever. Suddenly you were in a room fighting.
Exactly, yeah. So it's I think it is, as you said, sort of like conducive to the structure of what this game is doing. I will say, as both even this time and the last time, and maybe you can just tell me I'm doing it wrong, I find that you definitely need to grind in this game. Maybe I was doing it badly, but I especially remember my first time that I went through this. I got my butt handed to me.
Sure.
And so I went into this a little more proactively, and I saw my old saves. I was maybe like 4 levels over where I was, and things felt manageable this time. Whereas last time I felt like I was just awful at the game.
Yeah, I ended at the boss I fought the boss at level 14, I believe.
Okay. I was at 16 or 17.
Yeah, and that's probably smarter because that boss we'll get into
Yeah.
is just an absolute power check of a boss, of a first
Yeah.
boss.
Yeah.
But yeah, I never had the feeling of like needing to grind, but I did have the feeling of like you need to be doing the fights you come across. If
Yes,
that
yeah,
makes sense.
you can't avoid them.
Yeah, like and the game very much for lack of a better way of putting it, encourages you to grind. Like, literally, when you first find the very first checkpoint that lets you just teleport back to the jail entrance, it says in bold red letters, there are no downsides to leaving and coming back.
Yeah.
It really wants you to know that, because you can just leave and come back and do fights and then leave and come back and do fights, and you can just do that endlessly.
Yeah.
And you're able to grind in a way that you absolutely were not in Persona 5 Royal, in Persona 5.
You couldn't leave or you would make the time go for it. And I think that's something that also I learned a lot here was that SP is way more limited to me here. Like, there's very few SP items.
Yes.
But you also need to use your SP a lot, so it really behooves you to leave and come back because it auto refills.
Yeah, SP is a funny thing in this one because you run out of it instantly, but you get free refills of it all the time, right? Like, anytime you want to go back and come out, or go out and come back, your SP is back.
Yeah.
And so, like, it is a funny resource in that. What I will say is I think I benefited from having played through the whole game already. Mm-hmm. Well, here, let's talk a little bit about the characters, because this segues into something I want to say that has helped me greatly and is sort of like a poison pill of a thing to say out loud, unfortunately.
Okay.
But one of the things I do love about this is that you get your whole cast. I mentioned this last episode. You get your whole team right away, which is wildly overwhelming, but also rules.
Yeah.
It's so much to learn. They all have very similar combos where it's all like square to do basic attack combo, triangle to do, or whatever your buttons are, triangle to end the combo with a special attack. And there are similar sort of things to all of them, right? Like if you do 3 squares, excuse me, if you do square, 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 and then triangle, they'll use their kind of signature elemental attack, like spell, to end that combo, and that won't use SP. And so, like, that's a consistent thing you can remember every time. It's like, okay, I'm going up against a shadow that is weak to fire and has those shields that you have to break down to stagger it, and you don't want to hit it with fire, but I'm out of SP. But if I use On or use a fire persona on Joker and do square, 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 triangle, it will always kind of end with a burst of fire. So there's ways to get around SP that are, like, clever. There's also, like, the baton pass thing, where, like, when another person is like, hey, let me use one of my abilities if you press on the D-pad, that never uses SP, right? So there's all these little ways where you're totally right, where, like, just using spells is, like, will drain your SP, but there's little tricks here and there that let you use those things without spending SP, and that, I think, is a lot of where the skill of the system, of the, like, combat system comes in, is, like, figuring out how to kind of get resources where you wouldn't otherwise have them.
Yeah, you've really got to use everything the game throws at you, and admittedly, like you said, it kind of throws everything at you at once, and I think that's why we're kind of talking about combat from the beginning, is because essentially you walk in and you can start big fights, and you have your whole team, you can get into things. Like, by the end of this is a small thing, and I think we can get to some of the smaller stuff later, and I'm going to move my chair so it stops squeaking, but we can get to this later. There's like the master arts subset of the system, which isn't even like a thing I want to jump into right now because it's like so far down the line for me. But by the end of this jail, I already had Jokers maxed out, like just by going through it. And I was like, oh, this will be a thing I unlock slowly throughout the game. It's like, no, if you're using someone enough, like, you'll unlock things pretty quickly. And that's another thing. Like, for me, I tried to keep my team as balanced as possible. Yeah. Which is hard, but it felt like the right thing to do.
That's what I did my first playthrough, too, is I basically would just swap people out based on, you know, who was the lowest level at any given time. Yeah. And I liked doing that. I'm doing slightly different of a thing this time. So here's what I'll say that is kind of cursed knowledge to know, but I learned after by playing through the entire game already, and is not a spoiler in any way. Ryuji is busted.
Okay.
So Ryuji's main ability, like I said, everyone kind of has little tricks to them, right? So Yusuke, his specials, if you rapidly press triangle, will do more hits. Haru's is similar but different, where you have to hold down triangle and she'll kind of extend her attacks, right? Everyone has little tricks, like twists like this on their mechanics.
Yeah.
Sophia's is really cool and really hard, where if you like time the attack buttons to catch her yo-yos, it will like increase her damage more, which is cool.
Yeah.
Ryuji's thing is that if you hold the triangle button, you charge up an attack that's usually like he's like getting ready to swing his bat, and you can charge it up to 3 levels of charge, and then he lets a hit go, depending on how many times you press square before it. Determines what type of hit it is. His just normal triangle makes him resistant to flinching and damage. Yeah. And so you can basically just press triangle to give yourself super armor and then just like charge attacks. And I think it's his 3rd master art makes his attacks charge way faster. And his 4th master art makes him basically invulnerable while he has his armor on. Okay. So like, if you're ever having, here's what I'll say, it's not the most fun way to play the game, but if you're ever having trouble in a section, just take Ryuji, press triangle to put his armor on, and then just do square, hold triangle until it's fully charged, over and over and over and over again, and you will basically win the fight no matter what.
You'll get through it. That's really funny. Yeah, that's like, something that
he's felt really strong.
I felt like I was starting to get a sense of like who was definitely better at like certain aspects of it and who wasn't. And you know, obviously I know we haven't even touched on like the jail itself yet, but I think it's important to talk about the combat fundamentals, because it's a lot to get used to all of a sudden. And I do think like I do have to commend the system a lot for, I think, doing a really good job of taking things that I know from the original game, whether it's the, you know, persona aspect of it, whether it's the baton pass or the gun or all these sort of elements. And I think it's really great that all of that is translated pretty well. I think some stuff is obviously better than others in terms of its use during combat. Like, if anything, I mostly use the gun as a breather for myself.
Sure.
Or something like on her gun will eventually be able to be like, or maybe it always was and I just didn't realize, but the bullets are like fire charged. And so at some point you're able to do that. And so that's really helpful against a weaker enemy that has shields but is weak to fire, because you can just whittle down those shields like instantly.
Sure.
But I really respect how it does all that stuff, but then it throws more of these things at you. Like you're saying, like each character has their own little different sort of flavor a little bit. There's the master art stuff. There's I think the Showtime stuff is really great, and how it's like singular and does really cool animations with like each character. But you really need to be swapping and using everything, paying attention when pop-ups happen. It's a very busy system.
It is. And it's really, like, I enjoy that. I think they've made a lot of it satisfying, right? Like, the baton pass attacks feel really good, because, like, if you just normally swap to a different person, there's that little, like, high-five animation, which is cute but very slow.
Yeah.
So when you get a baton pass in the middle of a combo where you're just, like, hit someone really big and then pass to Morgana, and Morgana does a move, and then you're seamlessly fighting as Morgana, like, that feels really good, right?
Yeah.
Like, that is really a fun system.
Yeah.
And I agree that it makes you think about a lot of different things. The base enemies, you know, like, they don't take much thought, right? Yeah. But, like, when you start getting to these, like, harder shadows, or when you start getting to the bosses, it really does make you think about dodging these AoE attacks that they're laying down, and, you know, hitting them with specific elemental abilities. And one of the things I like about Strikers 2 is that I found all of the buffing abilities are more valuable than I ever thought they were in the turn-based combat.
That's
because
fair.
In turn-based combat, it was like, I don't want to give one of my characters an attack buff. Like, I don't want to spend my entire turn giving one character an attack buff. But in this game, you can give the one character you're using at that moment an attack buff, and then immediately keep attacking because it's not turn-based and you haven't spent an entire turn doing it.
Yeah.
And so suddenly even those abilities are, like, more interesting in this context.
No, I agree. I would only I don't think I used buff abilities in Royal until everything was it affects the whole team.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, even now, the singular stuff helps you so much more. No, I totally agree. I'm using that stuff like in this first jail that I wouldn't have used probably in the first like 5 palaces of Royal.
Right.
But that said, I very much understand for some people like the action heavy format for it isn't for them. I can see like when you're going
Sure.
against those base enemies, as you said, it's a little superfluous to an extent to do too much fancy footwork. I do like though that. Go ahead.
A lot of the time, it's funny, you ambush an enemy and then immediately get an all-out attack, and then the fight is just done.
Is over. Yeah, that happened to me a ton, and it can make it feel a little whatever. But especially as you said, you get to those harder enemies, it does affect things. I will say, as someone who never really played any sort of Muso game, like at all, I do appreciate. I really came in thinking the genre, like at its worst, like its harshest critics think of it as very mindless combat where there's sort of no feedback to it and you're just kind of chopping through enemies, and if that doesn't excite you, it's not for you. And I'm not saying that's what the genre is, but that's kind of like the harsh criticism that you can get for it. I feel like on the whole, you can get that a little bit when you are going up against like 20 jack-o'-lanterns, but there's usually a mix enough of personas here that you're fighting that at least you need to focus on a couple enemies. And so it did feel often like there was a strategy to it that I appreciated.
Yeah, and Muso games definitely aren't for everybody. I think that this is definitely doesn't feel like a proper Muso game to me, and I don't think it's supposed to, but it shares a lot of the DNA, obviously, and
yes. Yeah.
It's interesting to see sort of this twist that's been put on both the Persona mechanics and the traditional Muso stuff, and I really enjoy it. I think it's a very fun combat system.
No, I'm having a lot of fun with it so far as well, and also how relatively forgiving it is, even when some of those later fights felt really challenging. So anyway, let's actually dive into it.
Yeah.
There's a few. I mean, we can talk about that final boss. I will say the knowledge and the pain I had of my first playthrough heavily affected why I grinded so much this time around because of how painful it was that last time.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious to hear what people had experiences had out there. I'd imagine there was at least some people who also faced a bit of a challenge here.
I'm going to just say this right now. We'll get into the boss in a bit, but let me just put it now. It gets better. This boss is not the norm in terms of like how punishing those fights are.
Gotcha.
That's all I'll say now.
That's fair. And I also think if you don't go into this boss with the right people, you're absolutely screwed as well.
Yes.
So, yeah. Anyway, let's get into it. Obviously, we'll talk about combat, I think, throughout this series because there's just so much to dive into, but wanted to give a little bit brief overview of how we were feeling about it. Let's talk about getting into the jail itself. We're trying to get to Alice's castle. I like that we're sort of like on the back foot a little here. We don't know what's different about this infiltration to the metaverse. We have our preconceived notions, and a lot of the dialogue that'll pop up throughout the series is very much, or at least this first part is very much about how like learning what is and isn't the same. Right. That said, this first day, it's mostly about getting through the area and learning things. We're essentially trying to get into Alice's castle, but there are major spotlights that are blocking our way, both in front of the castle, and then we try some sideways, kind of like going up into a 2D section at one point.
Yeah. This 2D section thing is something they reuse a lot. They reuse it more in this jail as well, where you're kind of doing a little platforming section, right? It's a very unexpected thing, and not something I necessarily think, like, works super well, but is also not like offensive or anything.
Yeah, like I don't hate it. I think like the jumping isn't fine-tuned for platforming.
No, the jumping feels bad.
So it's not great, but I also like when they happen, they're so short that I relatively kind of just moved past it after a minute.
Yeah, it's just sort of a different change, a change of pace, right?
Yeah, it feels like this game wants to very much keep the pace changing for you a lot, and some of that works and some of it doesn't, but because it's changing so much, it's okay. Anyway, we're trying to figure out how to stop the spotlight problem. We essentially go to this system of 3 prison keeps that we're going for. And each one of them we're trying to get what is sort of a treasure, but not really a treasure. It's like an item that has energy to it, as we learn as we go on. So The first one, the first keep and the core, as they're known, are the not treasures that we get at them. The first keep deals with the sewers and everything. As we said, Tom and I spoke a little bit before the show. We're not going to kind of go through like room by room of these sections because it would be a little bit boring. And then I turned to left into the other sewer, and then I saw
they're all most like the sewer section is quick, and most of the street sections kind of share an aesthetic, right? Like before we would talk about in Royal or whatever, we talk about specific rooms where they were either had mechanical twists to them that were distinct or interesting, or they had visual twists that were distinct and interesting. The thing about this jail, at least, is like every area is basically mechanically very similar and visually very similar, where it's this sort of Shibuya taken over by Alice in Wonderland imagery, right?
Yeah.
And dark and brooding. And that's not a bad thing.
No.
It's just like it would belabor it to talk about every single like, hey, and then there was a wall that we had to go hit the power switches for. So we're going to be talking about them in broader strokes, basically.
Exactly. I will say though, I do like the aesthetic of the sort of like neon drenched Alice in Wonderland carnival-esque appearance that Shibuya is undertaken by, and the castle theme of it all. The sewers are real boring.
Yeah.
The sewers is just gray, and you just kind of go through a bunch of gray rooms.
Luckily it's pretty quick, but yeah.
It was really funny. My partner had only come in to watch the sewer part, and she's like, aren't the palaces usually like really colorful and different and unique? And I was like, you're seeing the one section where it's not. I promise it's cooler outside of this. Just like give it 10 minutes. Yeah. But it was just a really funny like, oh yeah, you came in at the wrong moment for this jail. But we do get this very theme park-esque look to everything as you're going through it for the most part. That the first prison keep, I don't feel like has anything notable gameplay wise that I'm really remembering.
No, not specifically, right? It's just kind of introducing the idea of it. It shows, I guess this isn't specific gameplay or whatever, but around it, there are all those like prison cells with all the people who had their desires stolen or kept there. It had if I hopefully played Persona 5, real big Mementos vibes, right? With these red prison cells kind of glowing with people in them. So yeah,
we'll especially see those come back throughout this jail, but especially makes sense for it being called a jail. But we get our first core, and as we learn, I'm gonna jump a little bit ahead here, but with these cores, we start to get the sense that they are manifesting personally related items to Alice.
Yeah.
They relate to her life in some different ways, and they evoke sort of emotional responses for Alice in a way.
Yeah. Kind of big things for her, right? Or things that are important to her. Like this first one, right, is like a dress, right?
Yes.
From her fashion lineup.
Yeah. We'll get a CD later and a few other, and another. But
I think it's a magazine is
the
other one.
That's correct. I was blanking on that one.
A magazine she was on the cover of, and then like an album of hers that was
Yeah, and so we're learning about sort of the things that she went through, in terms of her professional life that we are obviously seeing causing so many people to let her steal their desires of her. But yeah, this first prison generally sets everything up. The second prison keep more also introduces the first Futaba protection sequence, which if I'm not mistaken, right before it, if you take a right turn, I will get a little specific here, but if you take like a turn, you can get a piece of clothing for her that way boosts her energy. Like it's better than anything you can buy from Sophia's shop in this first section.
Yeah, Futaba has her own kind of armor. Like, again, this isn't a huge spoiler or anything. Just like don't buy her armor in shops or in the shop because you will almost always find some pieces for her along the way.
That makes sense.
That are like specific to her. I love these little hacking sections. There's a few of them in the palace.
Yeah.
And like mechanically they're fine or whatever. They're just like a kind of hold out and protect Futaba for a bit sort of section. I love the idea that Futaba is on the ground with you in a fight.
Yes.
Because
so cool.
That has never happened, really. You never get to see her. And so to see her there doing a thing that you're like, she's part of the team is really, really neat. It kind of goes along, too, just the idea that you get to walk around as anybody, right? Like, it's just really cool. It's a cool thing to have. Morgana making little cartoon noises as you run around and hop as Morgana. Like, there's a lot of little details like that let you see the Phantom Thieves from a perspective you didn't really get to before.
Yeah, it's a nice blend of things that Especially because, yeah, Futaba, you still can't obviously change into her for combat. So to have her there with you, these hacking sessions, as you know, if you've been playing, she's back there hacking. You essentially just have to protect her. If she gets whittled down before the hacking meter goes up, she's done, and you have to restart it. I did like, especially I think the first one, or the first couple, there's one in particular that essentially you get the chance to use, as we were talking about earlier, the like rideable skateboards and things.
Yeah.
And this one, I think this is a really good showcase area for it because it's relatively closed off. And so you hop on a thing and then you move around on it, and for a limited amount of time you're gliding around knocking into enemies, and you're doing like 3-4 damage, but you're knocking them back, you're causing disruption, you're kind of helping stave things
fun.
off. Yeah. And it's a fun thing to do. Yeah.
And it's very similar to, who is it? Makoto can do this with Johanna with the motorcycle, and then Morgana can do this where you turn into the bus and just drive into people. And I like that they kind of give it to anybody. And also just the idea of Joker riding around on a skateboard to attack people is so funny.
It's wonderful. And yeah, to your point, Makoto and Morgana have that sort of as an innate triangle ability, for us triangle. I do
special.
Really love.
I think they're called special.
Special, thank you. The doing that with Makoto for the first time was such a wonderful surprise for me, because Morgana, it like made sense, but I was like, I wonder what the nuclear version of it will be. And it's like, no, you're riding the motorcycle, you're doing this, and it's like, yeah. That's great, because that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, because that all the way back to the first Makoto cutscene, it's like it's so cool when she shows up on Johanna and rides through, and it's like, I want to do that, and then you get to do it.
Yeah. And the combo system is simple enough that it's fun to just, like, not look up the combos right away, just, like, press buttons and see what happens, and suddenly you're like, oh, I'm riding it. This is now actually me riding the motorcycle. Like, there's a lot of joy in the discovery of that early on.
Yeah, I definitely, with this game, was not someone, both the first time and this time, who, like, went through and was like, what are the square, triangle, or, like, a normal, special, how can I get a move in here to work? Because I did want to just mess around with it, especially with the fact that everyone feels a little bit differently. So anyway, you get the second prison keep. It introduces the Futaba protection of it. The third prison keep is a large Ferris wheel where we sort of get introduced the ideas of the crackers that are used in combat.
Those poppers, right? The party poppers, basically.
Yeah, and we use those to... they do wind damage, I believe, and to help kind of affect weak enemies to that. And we're also... this is a system, or like getting through here in this area as well. There's a lot of the turning levers off and like opening doors and certain things, but also learning the parts of maps where you can essentially glide along or ride a wire. To move to a place. Those are kind of like the two big mechanical things I think that show up in this area.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, of course, it's mostly about getting to this Ferris wheel, getting it to be able to move so that you can glide across and get to the third prison keep.
And both of these prison keeps have, I can't remember what they call them.
Like the harder personas to fight?
Yeah, they call them like keep, like captains or something like that.
Oh,
that are like guarding the keep. And so there's one on each of the second and the third one that are basically just like much harder shadows that are like mini bosses before you get to the core for that keep, right? So it introduces that sort of concept. And those guys are definitely like significantly more difficult and not like impossible, but definitely like more involved. You actually really got to use the skills you've been learning as opposed to just like the random fights.
Yeah, it's they're good places, I think, to learn some of the minutia of the system, because it often there will be some other enemies, but really they're going to be your main focus. So like getting evade timing down is really important, I think, with them. Learning when and how to use baton passes and things like that. I think these are really good like practice sessions for it.
Yeah, they telegraph their attacks way more of like, I'm doing a big AoE charge up, and then you can get out of the way. And
there's that's definitely what I think I learned the most was, which I don't think I did the first time around. I'm trying to remember back and pull those memories since it was my first time, but I don't think I evaded ever when I first played the game. And playing through this time, I was like, why am I not evading all the time? It's so like time, you have to do it with some graceful timing, but if you do, you're able to dodge so many what would be killer attacks.
Yeah.
Because I do find some of the persona ability attacks from enemies as well as yourself can really knock out a lot of HP in like 2 or 3 goes.
Oh yeah, you can get chunked in this game for sure.
Yeah. And it feels real bad when you're the one character left and 3 of your party members are dead and you have no SP and you're like, I'm just going to keep attacking and running and hope everything's fine. Please don't kill me.
Yeah.
But so anyway, we're getting these cores, we're ratcheting up sort of the awareness of everything. We get the cores, we progress through all the keeps, and essentially Alice throws the jail into lockdown at this point, and we're kind of forced to retreat, like we want to regroup, figure things out. This first section, again, we're saying it's sort of weird. We're learning how to go through it, so certainly if there's things people want to discuss, please let us know. But this first section, I think, is really, more than anything, the introduction to so much. At least, again, not knowing where things go from here. It feels so much of a, like, get used to the combat, get used to the way a jail system is set up. Acclimate. This is different.
Yeah. But, it's certainly the first jail, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean it's not fun or interesting. It just is like, it is the simplest it's going to be, right?
Yes. Yeah. I do dig the music as well, though. It's worth pointing out. We didn't discuss music yet, but I do like the sort of like main track to all of this.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we leave the jail, and as we come back out of it, we face some drunk guys. You thought things were bad in the metaverse? Well, now we got drunkards to face. And it's just, what I really love about this scene too is like, it's all of them and they're like, we don't want to put up with their crap. Like, oh my God, we are so sick of these drunk dudes so quickly. And you have a couple dialogue options in here. They become increasingly like, one of them is more so increasingly annoying and grosser and bad. The other guy's like, don't aggravate him. Just let him be drunk and gross to you. And we're like, no. And you're dealing with them. And then good old Hasegawa comes out of nowhere. How do you refer to him, I guess, in the long run?
Before this moment, he is referred to as like Inspector Detective Hasegawa or whatever. Yeah. And then you kind of somewhere in this sequence, you learn that his first name is Zenkichi. Yeah. Zenkichi Hasegawa is his name. And then from then on, his name card just says Zenkichi.
Which was hard for me because I kept calling him Hasegawa in my head. But
sure.
For now. Yeah. So apologies if you refer to him as Zenkichi. But anyway, Hasegawa shows up to help and helps get rid of these dudes and basically wants to use this as an excuse to be like, I helped you out, like let's go talk, and wants to talk at the cafe. You're right by there and everything, so he wants to talk about Alice's incident on the TV channel that we had discussed.
He even episode. Like points out that someone is tailing you.
Yeah.
He's like, hey, did you notice that guy tailing you back there? And the dude, it's this great moment
where
really the dude that's tailing you is like just hiding behind a pole and he's like, dude, what the heck? Like, yeah. Come on, man.
I really like, and not knowing where it goes, I do feel like it is either really telegraphing it or is genuine that Hasegawa will at some point be bad, I guess is my concern, because he just feels like he's too helpful. But I'm not asking you obviously for information, but
I will hold all of mine back, but it's what strikes me again is how immediately charming he is.
Yes.
Yeah. He is not just in this sequence, but in all the sequences in this opening few days. Like, he is just so immediately charismatic and so funny in like so many different ways that like, that struck me. Definitely.
I definitely enjoy him. What I also really love about his, obviously the gang doesn't want to trust him at this point. But every time Haru is just like so ACAB about it. She is just like, I do not like the police and I do not like having you here and I do not trust you in any way. Like,
the first thing they're like, he's like, why aren't you trusting me during this conversation at LeBlanc? And she literally says, sorry about that. We just despise the police is all.
Yep.
And that's like her exact word. And he's like, why would you say that while you're smiling? Like,
he always is like, you're so nice about being cruel to me is basically the relationship. And I think it's just I think it makes sense, especially as we go on, from Persona 5, of Haru having a fraught relationship with authority, especially kind of like the authority figure that her father was, dealing with authority and her father's death and all these sorts of things. Like, I think it ties in really well, but I just think it's so funny that like the nicest sweet character is the one who is also like just F the cops constantly is like her persona for this.
That role for her is very hilarious, but also it's worth remembering at the like why this group distrusts the police so much from the last game, because Joker was like drugged and beaten and forced to sign a false confession before the police were going to literally let him be shot in the head in a police station, right? Yep. So, like, they have absolutely every justification not to trust this guy, right? Yeah. Like, there's no reason they would want to trust him at this point. And like, because the experiences I've had with police up to this point have been so severely untrustworthy. So it makes sense that they would be so distrustful of him right now.
No, totally. Yeah, this is more of a thing. I appreciate the way that they so stringently make it like Haru's job here.
Yes,
I think it's something that, because like, you know, obviously politics in games is a never-ending conversation that will just be a thing forever. I think, like, as you point out, there's a very real basis for why they're acting this way. And obviously, if you're just jumping into this game, you might be like, is this an anti-police game? Like, it might be very, like, surprising to you in a certain way. And obviously, they set up a little bit that the police are after them. But yeah, there's a very, like, to their backstory sort of ingrained belief for them why they mistrust authority in this way.
Yeah.
But so that fraught relationship will come to a head several times throughout it.
Yes.
And anyway, he basically is asking us about, like, how everything is sounding pretty familiar, how, you know, we are essentially suspects again. We're going to be suspects for all this because things are sounding like the cases that happened with the Phantom Thieves. It tells us, like, we're going to basically be charged and arrested if we're not careful, but he wants to help make a deal. He wants to solve this case. Like, he wants the glory of solving the case, but he
believes you're not the culprit.
Yes. Yeah. But he needs our intel because he knows we're obviously getting stuff that he isn't or can't. So he'll try to help us stay out of trouble, as he works to both clear us, but really to, you know, further his career. We don't trust him though right now, and he kind of gets it. So he says, like, leave. He'll leave. Let us think about it. Take some time. We kind of debate after he leaves whether or not we're going to trust him. We point out that he's kind of, like, already been useful at this point. And, you know, that's left for later, but I do enjoy kind of at the capper of all this is that Sojiro comes in and is like, y'all are doing this Phantom Thieves stuff again, right? Tell me, fess up, let's go, come on. I love that he just kind of pops in. I will say my one real big criticism with this game so far is the lack of Sojiro.
Well, this is I'm glad you brought this up, because this is a great moment where immediately Futaba's like, no, what are you talking about? We're not doing nothing. And Sojiro is, like, immediately just on your side and supportive.
Yeah.
He's like, well, you guys if you're going to go to jail if you don't do this, then, like, go ahead. Like, you got to do this. I'll help however you want, right? Yeah. Like, he's immediately supportive of this kind of what's going on in a really touching way. Yeah. Where it's so nice after the last game. He's so, like, in the dark and kind of mean to you at the start.
Yeah, he's pretty instantly on your side, and it's nice to see that. Obviously, you know, with the very different adult kind of relationships, and I think that goes beyond, you know, an inspector, but you know, whether it was mistrust of Sai originally versus agreeing with Sai in the last game, or Sojiro, you know, being harsh to you and then versus coming over. There's a lot of, like, the thieves learning to trust people, but also very firmly placing their trust in certain people and not in others. So yeah, it's nice to see that still follow through here with Sojiro. So anyway, we get to July 28th. We got a bit to get through. So the last thing on the 27th, right, is they just make a plan about, like, Futaba hacking to lower the wall in the lockdown while Joker distracts, pretty much. So forgive me, my notes were just, we make a plan and ... we go infiltrate.
Yeah, basically.
So there's a little bit of shopping, but then we go in to infiltrate to enact this plan, and it's the sequence from the beginning of the game. As we said last episode, you're not waiting as long to get to the, you know, kind of in media res opening that we got here.
One thing I will mention, though.
Yes.
A thing that is notable in this game is that basically every time there's a new day, and this is something that will become clearer as you go forward, people in around the town. Like your allies will be in different spots around the city.
Yeah.
And if you go talk to them, they will sometimes give you items, and sometimes those items are worth going to get. So basically, each time there's like a new day, it's worth just going back and talking to folk, because you might get some goodies here and there.
And this one makes travel pretty easily because it's just you hit for PlayStation is just like hit the middle button and the touchpad, and you can flip through very easily. But yeah, good shout there. So anyway, we go in, we start essentially fighting. We're just as Joker while everyone is enacting their plans, and you're basically staving off waves for a bit of time. It's basically just until you hit a certain
I got
point.
wrecked this fight.
I did too.
I don't know about you.
I died a couple
I got
times.
knocked on my butt, and I was like, oh man, this is okay.
You really need to stay mobile in this fight. I found relying a lot on another small element of the combat is obviously like lampposts or other things that you can go on top of. And going there to then do a spin attack or something, you really need to be jumping around and
spin attack, lamppost, spin attack, lamppost. Just like get me out of the fight. Oh my god.
It gets rough quick if you let yourself get surrounded. But yeah, this was one of the tougher fights that leads to a sequence, I think, of tougher fights that we'll get to soon. But you have this really sort of extended sequence, and then I do want to shout it out, a really, really cool cutscene of kind of everyone coming together. Like, this is, to me, that sort of the anime movie to, like, anime TV series, like, comparison that I hear often about this game. This is such a, like, cool action scene. It's at the very beginning of the game, basically.
Yeah.
But it's, like, Morgana and Ryuji and An, like, jumping through the explosion, coming into, like, fight with you, people coming down from behind the wall, like everyone just coming together to help you fight, and like really cool action shots. It's a really good sequence.
Yeah, it's great.
But then so anyway, it's time to actually get into the castle and infiltrate. So we get through the spotlights, you do a little bit more of the 2D sides and get through a couple combat encounters over there. But then we're essentially going through a gauntlet of the castle to get to the roof. There's the return of one of the puzzles here of like using your phantom vision to your third eye to see footsteps to get the correct like button presses. Elevator of combat, you gotta go outside. Like it's basically like greatest hits of how you would infiltrate a palace previously, but just crammed into 20 minutes.
Yeah, there's another like sort of like just literally a timer on while you're on the elevator, just like fighting people off, right? That's a cool section.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just sort of a hype music rush the top of the castle sort of moment.
Exactly. And so we get all the way up to the roof, and it seems like there's something of a treasure here, but it isn't one. What we do see is they seem to have all of the desires up here, but the desires look like gems, which we realized from before, because essentially they're all seen as precious, but because there's such a wide variety of them, they sort of manifest all the same in this form as gems.
Sure. Normal Persona stuff.
Yeah, of course. It's logical enough. We just keep going. They're now all stuck in her birdcage, her locked birdcage,
Sure.
that we can't get to right now because it's locked. It doesn't seem like they can be stolen. So we need to be able to reclaim them, release them, and to steal them, we're going to have to send a calling card. But things feel a little bit different here. And essentially it seems like what's blocking this off is some emotionally painful memory for Alice.
Yeah, Ryuji tries to rush in and gets basically electrocuted on an invisible door.
Yeah.
And then Sophia touches the door, and you get this kind of glimpse, right, of basically voices of girls bullying Alice really bad. And Sophia explains that this is a memory, right? Like a painful memory of Alice's that they have to go find in the real world in order to get through.
Yeah. So we need to go find this, figure all this out. We think it might be, let me make sure I'm not missing anything, but we essentially have to find this location related to the voices. We think it might be something school age. As you said, it seems like other girls bullying Alice. So the key must be somewhere in Alice's old school. Of course, we leave the metaverse and we were like, what school did she go to? We can't find any information about her. There seems to be no record of her life, her personal life. Haru even suggests we ask Makoto's sister, Sai, for information, which is like, hey, you mind illegally dropping us some information on this person to help us out? So they're kind of all talking about this, but then Hasegawa shows up. And he comes
Yay.
up to us again. We're like, we don't trust you. Why are you here? And I do love, and I
This
appreciate.
dude just eavesdrop on like nonstop, overhearing all of their conversations.
Yeah, we keep calling him shady and that we don't like him, and he's like, God, stop being so mean to me. And is also like, but do you know how easy it is to hear you on this public bridge in a major train station? You dumb kids. Like he's thought through a few things.
Yeah.
So anyway, he jokes about that, but also brings up the fact of how there's no personal info of her from before her debut.
Right.
But he can get that info for us. And so he teases us about it. He's like trying to get us to be in an alliance, and he essentially tells us she's your senpai. So she must go to Yusuke's school. Of course. Yusuke thinks she went to Kosei High.
One of the best moments in this entire like sequence is he's like, she's your senpai, and Yusuke's shock at like she went to Kosei is like, oh my god, Yusuke, like, it's so good.
It's great. And Hasegawa was like, no. And so they all realize, oh, she went to Shujin, and everyone's kind of like,
I love that they find an excuse to send you back to Shujin in this game.
Well, it especially works as the first jail, reminiscing the first palace that took place, at Shujin as well. It kind of all neatly balances back. But yeah, it's very much like we haven't gotten these kids to the school yet, and it's summer vacation, but how do we get back there? And we get there, and they're like, we should go investigate the school. And this is another one of those moments where I was like, normally, maybe they'd go like days later or whenever we felt like it. No, they just go. They just go to the school.
Let's get into it. You wanted a boss fight today. I guess we'll give you a boss fight.
I guess we're going for it. So we go to Shujin and enter the metaverse there to find essentially a shadow student telling Alice that she should die. Just real hard bullying, really awful stuff. Obviously, we've seen sort of a pattern of terrible bullying and things at Shujin before. But that shadow distorts and explodes into a like bug creature persona that is then called the Lockkeeper. And this Lockkeeper is surrounded by prison cells all around it once we get into like kind of the transformation of its sequence. And we need to fight it. And this is sort of, as you said, the boss fight for today.
Yeah.
I don't have anything like crazy about the boss fight to say.
Yeah, they start calling this creature the Warden, I think, after the fight, too.
Yeah.
And, like, it's basically just, like, a big boss. The thing I will say about this fight that I think it shares with the boss fight, the final boss fight, which we'll talk about in a moment, is, like, these bosses have about twice as much health as they need to.
It's so much, yes.
They are such big sponges that you whittle them down and you break down their shields, and then you do a big, like, all-out attack on them, and then, like, they're at half health and all their shields come back, and it's like, well, I guess we just do this again.
Yeah.
And, like, it's a cool, like, there's a lot of cool, new, like, abilities it's using. It's, like, turns invisible at one point, right? Like, there's, like, cool things it does. It's an interesting fight. It's just so much health. Just so much health.
Yeah, I do think it's like the way it kind of does wide attacks, and it's sort of like swinging arcs and things, and the timing of it is interesting. But yeah, it's totally one of those. Especially as a Persona 5 fan, I'm used to all-out attacks basically being the final word.
Right.
And so when, as you say, an all-out attack is kind of the midway point. It's like, oh, well, all right, I guess we'll just...
It's such a bummer, too, when you whittle down those shields and then you go to the all-out attack and you do it, and it takes out, like a 15th of their health, and you're like, oh, okay, cool.
I probably should have just kept using elemental attacks at that point, it feels like.
Right.
Yeah. The all-out attack is one of the things that translates, and it doesn't quite have the same impact in, like, remotely the same way with these bosses. But, so anyway, you defeat this persona, you get a lock. Literally, a lock kind of falls to the ground. It's literally been keeping a lock, which I appreciate. And everything rumbles around, and we see a similar lock burst on the birdcage at the top of 705. The crown at the top of the castle rolls away. And really dramatically falls off and leaves behind it a chain that we'll get to later. But, everything kind of explodes from there. We feel like we've done our job. We go back to the main world and are planning out our calling card. We discuss, again, here's one of those things where, like, is this like a palace? Is she going to confess? Like, will this change her heart and will that affect things? Because if it doesn't, then none of this kind of matters. But we're going to go through the motions that we think we need to because we think it will help. They talk about how we're not stealing her desires, but theoretically, her desires would exist here to some extent. So even though we're releasing everyone's desires, somehow probably her desires are mixed in there as well. Again, persona.
It's this weird thing of like, her desires are there, so like they're stealing somebody else's desires, but then also they kind of just bring up that like if they just beat the crap out of a shadow and convince it to be nicer, that's usually also enough to change a heart. Yeah. Right? Like it's kind of like okay. And they sort of gloss over a lot of that, but On in particular kind of relates to her pain and what she went through in high school, right? And like wants to make sure that they also save Alice as a person who was like bullied and had her like desires distorted or whatever by this traumatic experience.
Yeah, she really wants to help her out here because we saw both the trauma in the room and kind of get the trauma that she's going through and get that she's probably seeing what she does as revenge, and that essentially that revenge fantasy distorted and grew into this major, obviously awful thing that is affecting so many people. And so, yeah, as you said, she wants to not just save all the people who have been hurt, but also potentially save Alice.
And this is a really interesting parallel too. Like this character as this first boss is really an interesting parallel to the first game or the previous game, because you know, Kamoshida was this horrible abuser who was causing traumatic events on high school girls.
Yeah.
And not just girls, because there was also, like,
the volleyball
Mishima.
Team, or the guys,
yeah. Like, there's that, too. So, like, he was causing traumatic experiences for high school students, and, like, it was all about stopping him. And then this game, as a sequel, the first boss is basically not directly talking about Kamoshida and what he did, but dealing with the fallout of when someone goes through something like that, right? And I think that's really like, they don't dig into it a ton in terms of that parallel, but I think it is a really interesting idea for the sequel to take a very similar sort of thing, but a different view of it.
Yeah.
And say, well, what could have happened? And On went one way with this sort of traumatic experience, and Alice went another way with this traumatic experience. And yeah, I just think that's a very interesting decision to kind of tie it to Shujin and tie it to a student going through like a horrible traumatic experience there.
No, you're totally right. It makes any sort of like, because we were joking, oh, they found a way to go back to Shujin here, but like the way it parallels that first palace is not just to retread the territory. It is almost to like be in conversation with it. And yeah, it's something that like...
Yeah, exactly.
As we'll get a hint of, we're not going to be hanging around this area, it seems, for the rest of the game. So there's not going to probably be exact parallels, you know, I assume, jail to palace. But at the very least, having this here very much is kind of what I would want storytelling-wise for them for a video game structure of like bosses and palaces and dungeons sort of like crawling in that way. So yeah, I totally am with you. I think it's a great parallel to what they went through. So we get that. An's going to write the calling card. Sophia is going to help her. We move forward into July 29th, and they send the calling card, and they do it in very dramatic Phantom Thief fashion. You know, they're old hats, old hands, I don't know. They're hats and hands at this, and so they do it in a big way. They're showing up on all the big TV screens. They're showing that they're back. They're really making this a big, like, reveal that the Phantom Thieves are back. And I love at the end of this...
The return of the Futaba cannon.
Yes.
Which was the thing that Futaba used to steal all the screens in Shibuya.
Yeah. And I love... we get one of the rare full lines of dialogue from Joker at the end of this sequence. He gets to do one full line of dialogue rather than just say, Arsene! Or something like that. He shows himself in his Phantom Thief garb. I don't know how they record these. That's my big question, is who's got the camera? The camera works normally in the metaverse just fine. All right, anyway. So they go in, they record their wonderful video, and then they put it out. And the calling card is out. And as it works, it clearly affects Alice. She's kind of like backstage at the TV station. Don't know what she's still doing there. I assume it might just be a similar looking hallway. but she gets the information that they've put out this notice for her. Her metaverse version goes crazy and is like, all right, let's do it. And then we go back in. It's sort
conveniently, there's a chain straight to the boss that you can just climb and don't have to do any of that stuff again.
Exactly. You could spend time grinding and going around.
Dude, it's so funny that this game is just so free and open, whereas like the other, like you could just grind, you can leave the palace again and just like go shop if you want. Like,
yeah. It's a little
very open.
It throws me a little bit at times where I was just like, oh, I can like I could grind for, like I listened to a podcast for 30 extra minutes and was like, I'll get an extra level or two just to be safe.
Yeah.
So I did that. And so anyway, you go in to have the Alice boss fight.
Yes.
And she turns into literally a bunny.
Yeah. White rabbit.
Yeah, conveying the Alice in Wonderland theme to its final endpoint. As we all remember in that classic story, Alice turned into a bunny and went psycho. No, so she turns into a maniacal bunny. Hopefully you have brought some combination of, for me, I went in with Joker, on Morgana, and Ryuji, the original four.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. To be fair, I knew what her weaknesses were going in.
Yeah. So one of the things that is annoying about bosses in this game is that if you go in with the wrong combination of people, you're just kind of like if you can't trigger weaknesses easily, it just sucks. Right?
Also, you better hope you saved recently. Like if you didn't save before the boss fight, you might have to go back a couple hours.
Yeah, it's really rough. I think that one of the things, one of the things I noticed this time going through is that the Warden Lockkeeper you fight has the same weaknesses or very similar weaknesses. So I think that might be like there are clues leading up to bosses that you can kind of catch on.
That would make sense.
But that's really rough. The other thing that's impossibly rough about this fight, and really I think the thing that makes it harder and you don't have to worry about nearly as much in future boss fights, is that at this point in the game, you have only had the opportunity to get, I think, a single revive item. And so if a party member goes down during this fight, you just are screwed.
Yeah.
And you a lot of the time don't have a ton of control over that. Because like a party member, she'll do that like butt bump thing, or in the second phase, she'll do that spinning wheel that just like absolutely can shred your health.
Just destroys
and if someone goes down, like you just don't have as much damage, and then suddenly the huge spongy health bar is just insurmountable to get through, and then somebody else goes down, and then you're just like absolutely screwed and you have to restart.
Yeah.
One of the things that is good to know about future bosses is that you start getting revive items. Anytime you see a revive item in a vending machine or a store, just buy it because like you're gonna need it. Yeah. And eventually you get revive, like the revive spell, right?
Oh, okay, good.
And so you will have opportunities in the future to make a party member going down not be like you lose the fight in a way that you literally don't have that opportunity in this first boss fight. So this first boss fight is extraordinarily punishing, to the point where like other fights are harder than it probably overall, but they're not nearly as unfair feeling.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was especially my first time going in. It was like I came in with the wrong party members. I had been prioritizing other people who were higher level. On and Morgana were super underpowered for me. Yeah. And so yeah, if you're coming in with people who aren't at a good level and are the wrong people, you're going to get your butt handed to you very quickly. And it is a frustrating thing that you can't change that without essentially just losing or reloading the save. And to your point,
it's rough.
It's a really tough one. You can get around some things. Obviously, the crackers are there. You can use the middle pole, but then you got to be careful that she doesn't use the middle pole against you.
Yeah, that's one part of this fight that I do like, is that when she goes to do the like basically stripper pole in the center, the way to like stop her, that attack will do like an insane amount of damage, but if you go and jump to a cracker and use that, like that'll knock her off the pole. Like there's some cool little mechanics to it. It's not like a badly made fight. It's just that the balance of those kind of the items and the not knowing what to expect at first glance. Like, it's just brutal the first time you go into it.
Yeah, like fighting it this time, knowing that I was a little higher powered, having the right party members, I like you said, I don't think it's a bad boss fight necessarily in a vacuum, but it is a part of the game that it really behooves you to read a guide first. Like this is such a great, am I ready for this? Let me go check a guide just to find out. And
it is a total power check of a moment.
Yeah. And it is also that good thing at the very least. Like if you are super underleveled, at the very least, you do have an out that if you reload a save, you can go back to the palace or the jail and just grind a little bit. And again, it's not ideal to have to grind, but at the very least, if you need to, the option is there. It doesn't like lock you back 3 days from there. But anyway.
No, yeah, it's really valuable because, like, if in Persona 5, right, in a situation like this where you're about to just, like, go fight the boss and you saved right before you're going to go fight the boss, you'd have to go fight people on, like, the highest of high alert if you're going to be grinding right here, right?
Yeah.
And, like, this is still high alert, but it doesn't mean the same thing at all, really, in this game to be at super high alert. Yeah. Like, if your security level gets maxed out in Strikers, like, it's just like, okay, you got to leave the palace, and then you just go back in the palace, and it's fine, right? Like,
the only real outside of the boss difficulty I think that's there are... At least I only saw one. Maybe there's others, but there's essentially the persona that you need to, or the enemy that you need to go and act the fight with. He's standing outside one of the prison keeps.
Oh yeah, the electrical guy.
Yeah, the killer teddy bear.
There are a few of those. I think there's like one in each jail or something like that.
Gotcha.
And they are so absurdly strong that I think even after I beat the game, I went back and I tried to fight that teddy bear and lost. Like they are like end game content.
Gotcha. Yeah, I had zero chance against him, so I was like, well,
it is brutal.
Yeah. Anyway, so you defeat Alice, you go through it all, and you get this chance to try to make Alice see the error of her ways. Anne kind of makes her repent. She's angry at her for the way she's acted, but she's angry because she wants her to be better and knows she can be better. So she helps her to see the error of her ways. I have to sneeze, please. Forgive me for that. I'm glad I muted correctly at the right time. I hope. Did you hear
it? It was well done.
Thank you. Anyway, that never happened. An helps make her see the error of her ways. The desires get returned. The gems disappear. People start disappearing out of the metaverse. We assume they kind of were able to go back to them being themselves. But
there's an adorable cutscene. They like you in cutscenes in this game, which I'm down for.
Yeah.
Of all the gems the desire gems going back, and you see this adorable moment of Sophia, like, with her arms in the air, like, dancing excitedly.
Oh, I took a screenshot of that moment, because it's also just an epic shot of all of them kind of, like, staring at this happening. It's like an endgame shot.
Yeah, this game is really well put together. Like, it's so easy to forget that you're not playing, like, a mainline Persona while you're having these conversations and seeing these cutscenes. It's like, it's really, really plays the part impressively well.
Agreed. Yeah, it's really cool to see all that stuff come together, and moments like that so early in the game make me really excited to see what goes on from here. But so anyway, we do all that, but the jail doesn't collapse. Everything still seems to be in place. Normally things would be collapsing around us. We'd have to do a cool running scene. That's when we would get our cutscene. But no, everything's fine. So we kind of just go home.
Yep. It's basically like, oh, well, this isn't collapsing, so this, like, the deeper you get into this first jail, the more kind of Morgana and the gang is like, this is really different from a palace, and we don't understand why yet, but the fact that this jail is not gone means that maybe there's still something going on we don't know about, and we'll just figure it out later, because we just did all of this Alice stuff, so we can't do anything else right now.
Exactly. So that all happens, so we go home. There's a nice cutscene kind of about, again, Sophia learning what humanity is like, and she kind of talks to you about, like, An was angry. Why was anger good to have there? And you kind of talk her through why sometimes anger can be a good emotion when wielded properly and by, in a responsible way.
To make someone see the error of their ways, I believe is what she says.
Yes. And so she learns a little bit more about being a human, or is turning into an evil, angry robot. I don't know. Anyway, we move on to July 30th. We got technically 2 more days to get through, so we'll get
Next,
through it quickly.
First off, you've seen Sophia talk about murdering someone, and now Sophia's like, oh, anger is good. I don't know what you're talking about, Jonathan.
It's really setting up some dark things for Sophia, but anyway,
Next week, Sophia learns about guns.
Just for anyone who is worried, I legitimately don't know anything about where the game goes. So this is just me spitballing of what I think is happening, and I think they're turning Sophia into the Terminator. Anyway, July 30th, Alice does her big confession. She's on the talk show where she destroyed a marriage and gives an actual confession that she was behind all of this. The reporter is even like, but the Phantom Thieves. And she's like, no, I did all of this. This was me. I was behind all of this changing of people's desires and things like that. And then we get another great scene of Hasegawa eavesdropping on them again.
Yep. So they express the desire to, they wish they could ask Alice, basically, right? Like, ask her what the heck is up.
Yeah.
And then Zenkichi shows up and is like, hey, what's that you said?
Yep. I really
hope Alice, I can do that.
I hope there's one scene where it's going to be him with like the fake glasses and mustache and big nose, like pair of like joke glasses on. He's just going to be like, "Oh, I heard you were talking, huh?" It's like the Gene Parmesan of Persona, basically.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he's eavesdropping again. He's like, I can ask her those questions for you if you agree to work with me. And so, we continue to have that relationship. Essentially, begrudgingly, we agree to at this point, I think. Or is that later?
No, you basically, the conclusion they come to is like, well, he did give us good intel with Alice's school.
Yeah.
And we don't really have a choice because the thing that he says is like, hearts are still being, like, incidents like this are still happening all over Japan. So, like, Alice may have been the source of whatever you just fixed, but, like, that doesn't mean that you're gonna get free and clear. You still, like, are gonna be blamed for this.
Yes, thank you.
And so, like, they say, we don't want to trust him, but he did give us good intel, and he is saying that he could arrest us right now and doesn't want to, so we might as well trust him for now. But if we trust him, the only way to convince him about what's going on is if we show him a jail and bring him into the metaverse.
Yes, yeah, thank you. And so, also, by the way, you're maybe just my computer, but you're looking a little fuzzy if you want to do a hand thingy.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Anyway, so he's eavesdropping. The change of hearts are happening, as you were saying, like all across Japan. There's a lot more happening to this. So yeah, we do show him the metaverse to convince him.
And he loses it.
He does. It's really great. And I love that like
this sequence.
He walks a few steps into the metaverse without realizing it yet. It's one of those like his head is down is kind of what the explanation is there. And then so he looks up and it's just like, why is all that there? Why are you in different clothes? What's happening here? And they're like, this happens every time. Silly metaverse.
And Morgana, like, totally hams it up and is like, come on, Zenkichi, get it together. And he's like,
Monster Cat.
It's just like, and Ryuji the entire time is like, yeah, I figured this was going to happen.
Yeah, he knew. And then it's like, Sophia's there. That's another person who wasn't here earlier. What's going on there? He freaks out. And then they're like, all right, time to bring him back. So they bring him back into the real world. He's kind of like, I wouldn't believe it, but you showed me it, so I guess I have to believe you at this point. And is like,
there's a line before they bring him in where they're like, they explain the whole thing to him, and he's just like, let's say we go get you tested for drugs now.
Right.
And then he goes through it, and he's like, just has lost his mind.
Yep, he has totally been broken. So it's like, all right, well, we're just gonna have to agree that this is real now. So we all do make a deal at this point. A little begrudgingly, but as you were saying, like, he's been useful enough that for now, let's trust him and make this relationship work. He wants us to actually, as part of this, be in... So they say, is it Sapporo or Sapporo? I don't know.
I always say Sapporo.
Okay. I wasn't sure.
I don't...
Someone correct me if we're wrong. But they say Sapporo in the game. But
yeah.
Anyway, want us to be there by August 8th. A quicker deadline than anything in Persona 5.
Be there in a week. What?
We don't know how to because we don't have a way to get there. And also it's worth knowing that we can't go by public transportation because other monarchs will probably be on high alert if this is really the thing that's happening all around the country. And so they're kind of like, do you want to risk getting on a plane and then have that pilot be a monarch and then bring the plane down? It's like real dark.
No, it's like, it's not even be the monarch be the pilot. It's like one of the monarch's brainwashed acolytes is the pilot and like crashes the plane, and it's like, whoa, that's like, you could have just said we should drive. Like, man.
So we need to find a way to get there that's not public transportation. So that's an important thing for us to do. And basically the deal has been made, and that's our goal. But we're like, okay, maybe along the way, we can help deal with other jails, but we're going to need a way to get there.
Right.
As well. So Sophia kind of talks about how, like, on the way, on our journey, she'll be able to smell jails as we get there. Classic computer ability to smell.
Yeah.
And she'll help us maybe shut some of this down. Maybe it will help on our final goal. Obviously, we saw with this jail, things didn't totally go away, so who knows? But that's kind of what gets set up there. And luckily, Sojiro has a hookup for a camper van to get us going.
Yeah.
So, July 30th.
Summer road trip.
And yeah, we're setting up for a summer road trip. Basically, July 31st, Hasegawa comes back, has Alice's phone. Futaba hacks it. Everything seems to be normal with her version of Emma. That was the big question of maybe she had a bespoke version. Her Emma seems to be normal, but it seems someone was tracking her usage. So obviously there is a larger thing going on. Hasegawa was impressed by her ability. But yeah, Alice, we at this point realize Alice knew Emma was causing other people to act this way for her, but didn't know why it was happening, it seems, or how this was all going on. So there's...
Yeah, Zenkichi says he interviews her, right? And, like, thinks she's telling the truth, and... Like, so we did know before that she was trying to get people to download Emma so that they would... And, like, she did know that them doing that would cause them to be obedient to her, but she seemingly didn't know why, is what she is claiming in this interview, is that she just knew that it benefited her, and so she leaned into it, but she didn't understand the metaverse side of it.
Yeah. And so with all that said, we have our info, and it's time to get our van.
You get a sweet van.
You get a sweet van. There's some talk about how the boys are going to sleep on top because they're not going to be creepy to the girls. We have to establish that very early on.
They established that the boys are going to sleep on top of the van before they learn that the van has a tent on the roof.
That is true, but it's good it has a tent.
You know.
I mean, it's good it has a tent. So they'll be able to sleep there. We hear them kind of like inside talking about how like, ooh, it's got like a 1950s American aesthetic to it. How delightful. It's an old-timey camper van is basically the gist of it. But we're going on a road trip, and that's where we're going to stop when it comes to the story.
I'm so excited about this because I love that this is the structure of this game, and obviously we'll get into it as we get farther, but like I love that the structure of this game is like summer road trip in a camper van with the Phantom Thieves as you're like going to first Sapporo on August 8th and like looking for jails along the way. Is just such a fun, weird structure to this game.
It's a really good setup. Like it makes me very excited, and I think fits the summer theme. It fits the idea that we're not just going to rehash the school year vibes, obviously, as much as I would love to go through a Persona experience again. Like, it is a different thing, and it's setting that up very early. So, yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's a fun, exciting place to be set up, but that's where we're going to leave things for now.
Hooray!
So I guess, Tom, we're at sort of a weird point. I don't know how best to set it up. Do you have, like, a vague idea of how to tell people where to get to for next episode?
I don't know. So we're going to have to determine... I don't remember exactly how much there is in terms of, like, how long it will take us to get through this stuff. So what I'll say is the plan is we're going to try to go through at least part of or get... Like, the plan was to go through the jail. But, like, I think there's a chance that we're going to get through to the mission start of the jail and then realize that that's enough.
Okay.
Like that there's a large section to talk about there before we even get to the jail. And then the jail and after the jail will be kind of the next sort of conversation.
Gotcha.
So we're either going to play it through that, where we're going to just get to the mission start, or we're going to go through that if we have enough time to do so.
Gotcha. I would say best bet, and obviously this won't be an issue later on, because at the beginning of next week's episode, we will clearly outline where we're getting to. So if you didn't get that far, you can stop, or if you got too far, you're just set up for the next episode. We'll also try to tweet out about where we're planning to go. I also will try to use the YouTube community feature, so keep an eye out on that as well. But stay tuned for more info on that. But we're either going to take the same structure we did with this palace, or potentially, if it's not that much, we'll just kind of go through a little bit more.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see what happens. I'm very excited to continue on. A fun start. I'm very curious where things go from here, because it feels like we played like almost a mini sequel already at this point.
So it does. And so where are you right now? You're at currently your state of mind is both Hasegawa and Sophia are both sleeper agents.
Are going to both betray us. Yes, yeah. At some point, but in different ways, they're going to betray us.
Yeah.
And then whoever is running Medici, or whatever the company is called.
Medici.
I'm going to say Medici.
Okay.
Because I am an eighth Italian. And so I think they might also somehow come into this in a different way, obviously with making Emma, but I don't know who's really controlling Emma.
Sure.
Maybe it turns out...
There was a throwaway thing right before the calling card where, like, there was a news report about Medici partnering with their longtime tech rival Pineapple, which is a very good joke.
Yeah, that was good. So maybe it will be Tim Pineapple who does it. I don't know. We'll find out. But until then, before we finish things off, Tom, do you have a pop quiz question for us?
I have two.
Oh.
So here's the thing.
Yes.
With Persona 5 Strikers, or Persona 5 Royal, I was doing, like, the palace was like a treasure question every time. But I didn't want to do that this time because there's just going to be fewer episodes, and those questions are fun when they're every palace, but they're not fun for, like, every week or every other week.
Sure.
I had two questions because there's two different things that I thought would be good questions and were fun.
Okay.
So feel free to answer one or both or either. The first question, as we get onto our road trip, we'll have one looking back and one looking forward. So The first question is actually about Alice. One of her cores is what they call her biggest album. It's Alice's biggest album she's ever released. What is the name of that album? Because they do say it, but they never say it out loud. So you should know it.
Okay.
The other question, looking forward as we go on our road trip, what is the model of camper van that you get?
Ooh, I'm glad I didn't accidentally say that then.
Those are the two questions.
Okay.
The name of Alice's biggest album, the model of the camper van. Both moments they do tell you, but only briefly, and I love the detail of both of them, so there you go.
Well, please leave those answers on the YouTube version of the show that you can find at youtube.com/Dornology. You can tweet at both Tom and myself. I'm at Dornbush and Tom is at Tom R. Marks. Or you can write in to dornology@gmail with your answers or any other questions or comments you have about the show. But that's going to pretty much do it for us for this week's episode of Take Your Time. As always, don't forget to, if you're enjoying the show, rate it, review it, like it, subscribe it, hit the buttons and the bells and the things that give us just the hint of serotonin that we need so desperately. But no, thank you so much for... It's fine. Tom, I'm fine. No, thank you everyone for tuning in. As always, we're excited to go on this summer road trip with you all. But until next time, nice to steal you.